Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Brothers and sisters and friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. In this episode, we're continuing prophethood, the argument from prophethood. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was he a liar? Was he deluded? Was he both lying and deluded, or was he speaking the truth? And what we spoke about, brothers and sisters and friends, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam could have been lying, and we spoke about that he couldn't have been deluded, and we spoke about the first two key arguments to disprove the fact that some people say that he is deluded. And they were, number one, if you look at instances in his life that happened during his life that a deluded man would have used to support his delusion, he actually responded in a way that a deluded man would not respond. He responded in a way that was truthful and real. And we spoke about the solar eclipse happening when his son Ibrahim passed away. Also, we spoke about his prophecies, because his prophecies were true. And a deluded man is someone who believes that he is true, but the basis of his belief is actually false. But if someone's prophecies become true, then he can't be deluded, because there is a truth behind what he believes and what he teaches. And that's what we spoke about, some of the prophecies of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now we're going to talk about the final point in disproving the delusion theory concerning the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before we go to the other points. So, what is the third point to disprove the delusion theory? Well, this essentially is his teachings. This is almost rational and emotional, because we spoke about the rational arguments against the delusion theory, but let's be a little bit emotional now. But also it has some rational kind of strength as well. It's a little bit of both, because when you look at the teachings, you see that they really attract the heart, they penetrate the heart, but they also agree with the mind as well. And that's what I mean by it's rational and emotional. So let's look at the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by doing so, we know that he couldn't have been deluded. For example, let's talk about his theory on geopolitics. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith in Tirmidhi, the son of Adam only has a right to three things: a house to live in, clothes to cover his nakedness, and dry bread and water. Now, if you think about it, this is the basis for Islamic geopolitical theory, because essentially it's saying that there is enough resources on this planet to ensure that everyone has food, shelter, and clothing, which is in contrast to the capitalist theory. Because what do capitalism say? What do the capitalists say? They say there's not enough resources and too many needs. But this is a geopolitical myth. Because we know, if we go to the Food Agricultural Organization, which is linked to the UN, they said that there's enough calories on this planet to feed everybody 2,700 calories. An average adult needs around 2,000 calories. And if you consider children, that's enough calories to feed 2 planets. So the Prophet ﷺ was right from a geopolitical perspective. And our current theories are actually wrong, that capitalism is false. It says too many needs, not enough resources. So it creates a philosophy of distribution. So from this perspective, it shows that, look at the amazing teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. How can a desert Arab in the 7th century actually develop the basis of an economic theory that transcends capitalism and time, and it actually is true? Take his prophetic traditions, his teachings on good manners. In a hadith in Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, the best among you is he who has the best manners. Take the hadith in Tirmidhi. The Prophet ﷺ said, the most perfect in faith among the believers are those who possess the best morals, and the best among you are those who are kindest to their wives. Consider community, brothers and sisters and friends. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith in Bukhari, what sort of deeds or traits of Islam are good? He was asked. The Prophet ﷺ replied, to feed others, to greet those whom you know and those whom you don't know. Consider peace. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith in Bukhari, he who makes peace between the people by inventing good information or saying good things is not a liar. Consider love, brothers and sisters and friends. In a hadith in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, "By the one who has my soul in his hand, you will not enter the garden until you believe, and you will not believe until you love one another. Shall I point out to you something which will make you love one another? If you do it, make the greeting, the salam, widespread among you." So brothers and sisters and friends, we see from this perspective, how could the Prophet ﷺ be actually deluded? Because not only are these teachings true intuitively, but they agree with the mind. That's what I meant by rational and emotional. So when we look at these three key arguments against the delusion theory, we know the Prophet ﷺ could not have been deluded. And these are, there were instances in his life that a deluded man could have used to support his delusion, but the Prophet ﷺ did not use them in that manner. He was real, and he was true, and he was accurate. Also, the Prophet ﷺ had prophecies that were true. How could this be a product of a deluded man? And finally, we spoke about the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. They're very emotional, intuitive, they agree with our hearts and they agree with our intellects. That they're true, and they're real, and they're applicable, and they transcend time, and they're beautiful, amazing values. Are these the product of a deluded man? Of course not, brothers and sisters and friends. Let's go to the third point. Well, maybe he was lying and deluded. Well, this is actually almost a paradox. It's false. Because how can two false things make a truth? Because we know he couldn't have been lying, as we discussed previously, and we know he couldn't have been deluded, as we've discussed, then how can he be both? How could he be both? Because two false things do not make something true. And it's as simple as that. Therefore, brothers and sisters and friends, he must have been speaking the truth, as we all know. Take, for instance, some quotes from historians and academics. You have Dr. William Draper here in his History of Intellectual Development of Europe. He wrote, 4 years after the death of Justinian, AD 569, was born in Mecca, in Arabia, the man who, of all men, had exercised the greatest influence upon the human race, to be the religious head of many empires, to guide the daily life of 1/3 of the human race, may perhaps justify the title of a messenger of God. Consider Thomas Carlyle in his On Heroes and Heroes Worship. He said, "The man's words were not false, nor his workings here below. A fiery mass of life cast up from the great bosom of nature herself. To kindle the world's maker had ordered it so." So from this perspective, brothers and sisters and friends, we know he must have been speaking the truth. However, there is a key contention, there is a key counter-argument to this narrative. Because if the historical narratives, the ahadith we're talking about, the seerah, the life of the Prophet ﷺ is true, then we can only conclude that the Prophet ﷺ was speaking the truth. Because if this is real, if this historical narrative, this Islamic history is accurate, then how can you even conclude the Prophet ﷺ was a liar? It's impossible. But the contention that comes, the counter-argument that comes is, well, it's all legendary. The ahadith, Islamic history, the way you preserve Islamic history is based on legends. It's false. And that's a key assumption to your argument. How can you say he was truthful when the history that you use to claim he was truthful is false? And these are some kind of the key contentions they bring about. They say that it's bias. Islamic history is full of bias. They also say, brothers and sisters and friends, that there are no early records of ahadith, of the prophetic tradition, so you can't trust them. They also say that we have fabricated hadith. We have prophetic traditions that have been fabricated, so how can you trust any prophetic tradition? They also say that the sciences of hadith, how we preserve Islamic history and the narrations attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, they say that they're not robust, meaning that they're not accurate, you can't trust them. And significantly, brothers and sisters and friends, they say that testimony is not a valid source of knowledge. And what they mean by testimony is the say-so of others, because a hadith is based on the say-so of others in a transmission, in a chain of transmission that claim that the Prophet ﷺ said something or did something. And they say testimony as a source of knowledge, it can't be trusted. So what we're going to do, brothers and sisters and friends, is actually break down each of these points. And once we do that, we will show that the Islamic history is accurate. Testimony is a valid source of knowledge. We're also going to show that the existence of fabricated hadith actually shows that the sciences of hadith is working. We're going to show that there are early records of hadith, and we're going to say that actually there is no bias at all. Because if you understand bias, then the one who claims bias from a historical perspective, the onus of proof is the one who claims bias. But when you look at the prophetic traditions, and we're going to discuss this in the next episode, when you look at the prophetic traditions, then you see, hold on a second, many of the traditions go against the cultural norms of the Arabs at that time. So how can you claim bias? Because surely, if someone was, wanted to be in line with the social norms or with the culture of the time, they would have never mentioned such things about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why it's very important that when we discuss all of these counter arguments and contentions, it actually shows that you cannot reject Islamic history or the prophetic traditions. And if you do, it's equivalent of rejecting the existence of Aristotle, of Plato, Hitler, World War I, World War II, the history concerning the Egyptians, Sumeria, all known valid history. Because when you look at the criteria and the assessments made by the Islamic scholarship to see if these narratives are actually trustworthy, it's a very profound, robust science, in contrast to the Western tradition on how they assess whether history is true or not. We're far more robust. So therefore, to reject the Islamic historical narrative and the Islamic sciences concerning history is equivalent of rejecting any known history, like even the Battle of Waterloo.